Started on our panel today, and we'll try to keep it not too loud, but loud enough at least for our recording. Welcome to panel 7, Censorship and Academic Freedom in the Neo-Fascist Age. I am the moderator for today. My name is Mickey Huff. I'm the president of the Media Freedom Foundation and director of Project Censored. I'm also a professor of social science and history at Diablo Valley College, which is about an hour away north of here. I teach courses on political economy, social justice, critical thinking, and I also teach here at Cal State East Bay. I teach in the communications department, moral economy of digital media. I teach persuasion and propaganda and a few other things. Project Censored, of course, is co-sponsor with the Union for Democratic Communications of this conference, and we are honored and delighted to be here, and we're very happy that you're here too. Have a wonderful panel to talk about a really important issue, and it's going to be sort of an expertise in terms of the introduction of academic freedom issues. And then we're actually going to continue that with someone who has been on the front lines of the issues dealing with academic freedom, and actually with a major case, a national case. So I want to introduce our speakers and jump right into our topic today. I'm going to have a few-minute introduction, and then we're going to move over to our guests. Maybe they'll do 15 minutes each, just to sort of give you an idea of where they're coming from. And then we want to turn it over for a conversation, right? So for more of the time, we hear from you all, and they can go back and forth as well. So our guests here today, our panelists, include Steve Masick, who's directly here to my left. Not maybe ideologically, I don't know. Probably we're in the same neighborhoods. At any rate, Steve Masick edited and introduced he does the Media, Democracy, and Action chapter in the Censored books, including our new book, Censored 2020. He is a professor of communications at North Central College in Naperville, Illinois, outside of Chicago. He's the author of Urban Nightmares, The Media, the Right, and the Moral Panic Over the City. That's in 2006. His op-eds and essays about media, politics, and free speech issues have been published in a wide range of magazines and newspapers, including Z Magazine, St. Louis Journalism Review, Atlantic Constitution, Columbus Dispatch, and News and Observer in Raleigh, North Carolina. So with that, please welcome Dr. Steve Masick. And two Steves left. My colleague at Diablo Valley College, Dr. Alpert Ponte. Alpert Ponte is assistant professor of political science and co-director of our social justice studies program at Diablo Valley College in Pleasant Hill. That's just east of Berkeley. He mentors students in the Puente and Umoja programs and is co-advisor for DVC Men of Color Association, MOCA, and Roots Social Justice Student Club. Some of this is past information. He's also a member of the DVC Dreamers Alliance, which serves to support and build solidarity for undocumented students. Professor Ponte earned his PhD from the Department of Political Science, specializing in race, ethnicity, and politics and political theory at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. Has a BA in Chicano Studies and Political Science with distinction from UC Berkeley. He was selected Ronald McNair Scholar. Dr. Ponte is a product of California Community College, having obtained his associate arts degree at Mount San Antonio College. And Dr. Ponte seeks to advance his research, pedagogy, and community engagements towards building transformative possibilities for our students and society. And so please welcome Dr. Ponte. And I'm going to say a few brief words about academic freedom here from the Censored 2018 book that was written by the communications scholar Deepa Kumar. Many of you may know Deepa, who's at Rutgers University, and she wrote the foreword for our 2018 book. And in it, she really focused in and honed in on the principle of academic freedom. And she talked about how it applied specifically as much to journalism as it does to scholarly research. And she writes, quote, "In this post-truth moment, it's worth recalling the landmark case involving Richard Ely, economics professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, who came under attack in the 1890s, a period of great social and political conflict for pro-labor views. And in 1894, the UW Board of Regents ruled in Eli's favor, producing a defense of academic freedom that's been widely cited ever since. And so I'm just giving a little bit of this brief historical background. I'm not stepping on toes, right?
No. I'll say a little bit more.
Yeah, because because sometimes toes are in. I'm on the toes. At any rate, this is a quote from the UW Regents, and I do want to share it with you before we turn things over here to Steve. It's pretty significant, and then of course we'll go to Albert to talk about his experiences at Diablo Valley College. Quote, as regents of a university with over 100 instructors supported by nearly 2 million of people who hold a vast diversity of views regarding the great questions which at present agitate the human mind, we could not for a moment think of recommending the dismissal or even the criticism of a teacher, even if some of his opinions should, in some quarters, be regarded as visionary. Such a course would be equivalent to saying that no professor should teach anything which is not accepted by everyone as true. This would cut our curriculum down to a very small proportion. We cannot for a moment believe that knowledge has reached its final goal or that the present condition of society is perfect. We must therefore welcome from our teachers such discussions as shall suggest the means and prepare the way by which knowledge may be extended, present evils be removed, and others prevented. We feel that we would be unworthy of the position we hold. This is right, this is the Regents. We feel that we would be unworthy of the position we hold if we did not believe in progress in all departments of knowledge, in all lines of academic investigation. It is of the utmost importance that the investigator should be absolutely free to follow the indications of truth wherever they may lead. Whatever may be the limitations which trammel inquiry elsewhere, we believe the great state University of Wisconsin should ever encourage that continual and fearless sifting and winnowing by which alone the truth can be found. And with that, I want to turn things over to Dr. Steve Masek.
All right. Sifting and winnowing. I have to add that I am an alumni of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and that famous statement about the function of the university, that it is to engage in continual sifting and winnowing, is still the official policy at the University of Wisconsin, even though when Republican Governor Scott Walker was able to appoint members of the Regents, he had removed from state law the protections for tenure that had been in place, that had been put in place roughly around the same time of that statement. So I'm not sure academic freedom is quite as secure at the University of Wisconsin today as it was when that statement from the Board of Regents was made. Okay, what I'd like to talk about today, just very briefly, is, and I'll just add that I'm going to do this from the perspective of someone who is on the the executive committee of the Illinois AAUP, the Illinois American Association of University Professors State Conference, and have been for the past 6 years or so. I want to talk about what academic freedom is, and specifically the AAUP's understanding of academic freedom. Secondly, why academic freedom is important. And then third, and I'll spend the most time on this, is academic freedom being threatened? And if so, by whom? Because we hear a lot of discussion these days about a so-called crisis of free expression or crisis of free speech on campus coming specifically from the right. And they seem to suggest that the main threat to academic freedom is paradoxically liberal professors, left-wing professors, and left-wing students, the main people who inhabit the academy. So let me start with what is academic freedom. The concept of academic freedom really traces its roots back to the 19th century German university, where a lot of kind of eminent American academics like John Dewey got their training. And in the German university in the 19th century, there were two concepts, two freedoms that were considered essential for the functioning of the university and for this relentless sifting and winnowing that leads to the advancement of knowledge. They were Lehrfreiheit und Lernfreiheit. Okay, sorry, I'll I'll translate. Lehrfreiheit means freedom to teach, and Lernfreiheit is freedom to learn. And the theory was that, unlike in other university systems, in the German university system, students should be free to take whatever courses they want, attend whatever lectures they want. They couldn't be forced to take, to attend, one scholar's lecture over the other. So the student should be free to explore the full extent of knowledge gathered together and expertise gathered together in the university. Moreover, the scholars, the teacher scholars, the academics, the faculty should be free to teach their subjects, right, as they see fit. So these two concepts, Lehrfreiheit and Lernfreiheit, made a big impression on a generation of American intellectuals and philosophers who got their PhDs in Germany, primarily among them John Dewey, who is important because he is one of the founders in 1915 of the American Association of University Professors. And he is one of the primary drafters of the AAUP's Statement of Principles on Academic Freedom and Tenure. And in that statement, in that famous 1915 declaration, the AAUP claims that academic freedom encompasses three different sorts of freedom. First, freedom to research. Freedom to explore a topic wherever the research may lead according to your own disciplinary training and interests. Second, freedom to teach without being second-guessed by administrators or others outside the university, and to teach your subject, right, as you see fit. Third, freedom to comment, and this is a freedom that's often forgotten, freedom to comment on university policies and on departmental curricula, right? The freedom to comment on internal university policies is considered an essential part of academic freedom, according to the 1915 Declaration. And then fourth, and probably the most controversial of the freedoms included in academic freedom, is freedom of extracurricular utterance. So that scholars, faculty, should be free to comment on matters of public concern and exercise their rights as citizens, their First Amendment rights as citizens, without fear of retribution from their employers, from their administrators. And the justification for these freedoms is that without these freedoms, scholars are not able to do their job, right? Their job is to discover new knowledge, to introduce and disseminate knowledge to their students, and to inculcate their students with the spirit of critical inquiry and with the skills that they need to become scholars themselves, right? That's the essential, as the AAUP understands it, core responsibility, right, of a scholar. Of a faculty member, and without these four freedoms, it is impossible to do that job, right? If you're not free to research, free to teach, if you're not free to comment critically on your university's policies, and if you can't, weigh in on public controversies and debates, you are not going to be able to do the job of a university professor. At least that is the assertion, right, of the AAUP. And if you want to look at sort of what I think is the authoritative account for the justification for academic freedom, it's a book by Robert Post called In the Common Good, which is sort of he's a law professor at, I believe, Yale Law School. He was at UVA for a while, but he is at Yale Law School, and it's sort of his theory of his attempt to theorize academic freedom and why it is important. So I want to move on from what academic freedom is and why it's important to is academic freedom being threatened? And this is, I think, I'm going to take the bulk of my time to answer this question. Because in the past few years, I'm certain everybody in this room knows, conservatives have increasingly, right, been sounding the alarm over what they claim is widespread suppression of free speech and intellectual freedom at colleges and universities around the country, and its suppression supposedly being carried out by university faculty and students, right? So it's supposedly being carried out by faculty and students. Media outlets like Campus Reform, College Fix, Breitbart, and then, of course, Fox News routinely highlight stories about controversial speakers like Milo Yiannopoulos and Charles Murray being banned from particular universities or facing vigorous protests when they're allowed to speak. Best-selling authors like psychologist Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff of the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education write books like The Coddling of the American Mind, describing today's college students as thin-skinned snowflakes unable to cope with ideas or information that contradict their hyper-politically correct preconceptions. And probably most importantly for me, right, in his now notorious September 26, 2017 speech at Georgetown Law School, former Attorney General Jeff Sessions, in his speech to a bunch of law students, contended that, quote, freedom of thought and speech on the American campus are under attack. In that speech, he went on to argue that, quote, that free speech is, quote, in retreat on college campuses, and that higher education in the US is becoming, quote, an echo chamber of political correctness, and, quote, a shelter for fragile egos. Now, the U.S., now it's one thing for the then sitting Attorney General to say this, but what made it sort of even more alarming is that the U.S. Justice Department essentially reiterated many of Sessions' talking points in a statement of interest that they filed on the same day in a lawsuit concerning the alleged violation of First Amendment rights of a sort of Christian preacher at Georgia Gwinnett College. So the picture painted of contemporary college students by Haidt, by Sessions, by Fox News is, I think, largely a caricature. This is sort of the most important point I want to make. Of course, one can point to some isolated incidents at campuses here and there where left-wing students or even left-wing faculty, right, have done things that support the Haidt Sessions narrative, right? You can find instances, if you cherry pick enough, you can find instances that support this right-wing narrative. But the fact is they are scattered incidents. They represent a fraction of, for example, the speaker cancellations that the right is so concerned about, right, represent a fraction of the number of right-wing speakers that have been invited to campuses and have spoken without incident, usually to empty rooms, right, because none of the students are interested in what they have to say. Moreover, their portrayal of young people today is completely off the wall, right? It is actually a fiction, because young people, especially young people in college, with some college education or with a college education, are more supportive of freedom of expression, even for freedom even for potentially offensive expression, than any demographic, right? Any demographic group anywhere in American society, right? They're more supportive. College students are more supportive of freedom of expression, even for offensive speech, than any other age group, any other demographic, right, in American society. If you look at the opinion polls, and ironically, right, the demographic that expresses the least tolerance for freedom of expression tends to be the older, non-college educated, church-going white people, mostly in rural areas, who make up the bulk of the target audience for Breitbart and Fox News. So it is a completely unfair caricature of young people that is being perpetrated by the right. I want to argue that the main threat to academic freedom today emanates from the right wing, and primarily not from forces within colleges and universities, although I have my concerns about some administrators, but from outside of the university, right? ranging from conservative politicians of various kinds and their allies in the right-wing media to out-and-out neo-fascist white supremacist groups, online right-wing trolls, and so on. Typically, these threats are directed against progressive, liberal, and outspoken radical faculty, oftentimes women, oftentimes people of color, who dare to speak out about injustice, to criticize some of the cherished notions of the right, or to question, right, their own university's kind of reactionary policies. The keynote speaker for this conference, or the guy who's going to receive the Dallas Smythe, George Ciccarello-Marr, is a case in point. I'm sure I don't need to remind you that he was a tenured associate professor of politics and global studies at Drexel University in Pennsylvania. On Christmas Eve 2016, he openly mocked a common alt-right conspiracy theory by tweeting, quote, "All I want for Christmas is white genocide." His statement his statement led to his university issuing a statement condemning him, right, and criticizing him, and criticizing his statement as reprehensible, so clearly they didn't get the joke. The right-wing media stoked the outrage, right, over Christmas Eve and over the week following Christmas, with their endless coverage of his tweet and then some of the follow-up tweets that he made. As a result, Ciccarello-Marr received a number of death threats. His provost initiated an investigation of his social media discourse, which was seen as uncollegial and uncivil, and placed him on paid administrative leave, but still placed him on administrative leave. And eventually, he resigned due to fear for his own personal safety, right? So that's I will argue that's a more typical case, right, of the threat posed to, or the violations of academic freedom than are the ones held up by the right wing. I'm just going to mention, if I have a second, I'm just going to mention two more that I think are really relevant that have happened this year. So some of you may have heard that on August 29th of this year, the Education Department, headed up by Trump's Secretary, probably the most unqualified Secretary of Education in American history, Betsy DeVos, sent the University of North Carolina and Duke, who run a joint Middle East Studies program, a letter complaining that the program, this jointly run program, focused, quote, disproportionately on the positive aspects of Islam, and did not focus enough on Christianity or Judaism, and requested that the program be amended and threatened to take away a federal grant that the program had been receiving for close to a decade if changes were not made. Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos's investigation into the consortium and the joint program on UNC Duke program on Middle Eastern Studies was begun after Representative George Holding of North Carolina, who is a notorious Islamophobe, sent her a letter condemning the program for holding a conference with, quote, severe anti-Israel bias and anti-Semitic rhetoric. That is what I think constitutes the real threat to academic freedom on American campuses, the Education Department threatening to take away a grant unless two very notable universities make changes to their program so that it's less critical of Israel. Finally, and something that cuts close to home here for those of us in the UDC, you may have heard that at the beginning of September, the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting in America, CAMERA, which is a right-wing media monitoring organization devoted to promoting, quote, accurate and balanced coverage of Israel and the Middle East, but really basically devoted to policing anyone who dares to criticize Israel or Israeli policy, filed an open records request targeting University of Massachusetts and Dallas Smythe Award-winning communications professor Sut Jali over his alleged anti-Israel advocacy. And the proof that they pointed to of his anti-Israel advocacy was a film that the Media Education Foundation, which he heads, produced called The Occupation of the American Mind, claiming that it was not balanced and it was too critical of Israel and it made unfair criticisms of Israel. So what they did was they requested, using a FOIA request, all of his emails, and especially in an effort to see whether or not he was communicating with the enemies of Israel. Camera's abusive request chills academic freedom, and I think it really demonstrates the need for us to do something to protect these critical scholars. And with that, I think I'm going to end. Yeah.
Steve, when was the Sut Jali FOIA thing?
This was in early September.
Oh, like last month?
Yeah, last month.
Oh,
Early September. That the request was filed by Camera. And the AAUP, I'm sorry to say, so I'm a member of the AAUP, the Executive Committee of the Illinois AAUP State Conference, but one of the problems with the AAUP is we are very slow to respond to things because we don't have a rapid response team that responds immediately to these kinds of incidents. So the ACLU, I believe, is stepping in to help Sut Jali in this struggle. But the AAUP has yet to make a statement because no doubt we're doing some sort of investigation that will take months. All right. With that, I'm going to pass it along. Yeah.
So thanks to Dr. Steve Masick. Much appreciate those important comments. We're going to turn things over now to Dr. Alpert Ponte. And Steve, thank you so much for that overview and sort of an update, some case studies and the ideas. And I know Alpert has actually a lot of very relevant things to share with everyone. And I know some of them are personal, and I know some of them have been very difficult to contend with. So, Albert's not only a scholar of the First Order and a real strong advocate for social justice with students on campus, but he's been literally at the receiving end of these very specific kind of right-wing targeted attacks. And so he's going to talk a little bit more about those. So here you go, Dr. Ponce.
Thank you. Good morning for being here. And I think this is a great segue in laying down sort of the universal framework for understanding what academic freedom is. And I'm just coming in with my particular subjective experience in really defending that principle. Because one thing, when we think about academic freedom, it is highly contentious. It lives, it exists in an abstract form in a political terrain. So I think it's accurately depicted that a lot of the response and the repression is happening outside of campus, right? From these political forces that are aligned, that hold all power. And when we hold all power as political scientists, I'm situating power in how we think about that principle that is abstract, that we hold dearly, and that undergirds the university system as a model for us to do what we do, to research, to engage, and to challenge those forms of power. But enter my subjectivity into Diablo Valley College, a community college that I love to teach at. I love to have colleagues like Professor Huff here that I call not only colleagues but comrades. We're engaged in this kind of contentious debate. And part of the irony when I entered Diablo Valley College, when I began there, I was hired specifically to teach developed courses on race in political science, which is my specialty. And the origins of this happened, again, speaking of... Too close, sorry. We're recording. Yeah, it's too loud. I thought the echo was just me.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, I'm loud anyway. So I really don't need a microphone. But over Christmas is the same response that I received it was exactly 2 years ago. It was one particular talk that I was asked to deliver as a community lecture at Diablo Valley College. So here's the balance. At Diablo Valley College, I was asked to give a talk on race in the United States. So I titled it White Supremacy in the United States. And the premise of the talk was just to provide nothing controversial, but to face the development of ideas and the historical development of U.S. institutions over time from its inception, which is on its surface empirically, verifiably, white supremacist, political, social order. But that proves to be controversial in some quarters. And this is based upon my own research and my own engaged scholarship and community engagements that I've developed. So the talk was very good talk. Students were engaged. We had a packed room, standing room only. It was recorded. Right? Recording talks always can prove to be dangerous. And this is where the student response. We did have some students. We don't know who's recording, who's not recording. Send this talk out to a group called the Red Elephants. Red Elephants is a group based in Southern California, sort of this neo-fascist type of organization that works and attempts to police professors and students and the university terrain in general. From there, I didn't know what was going on. So over the period, it was over Christmas break, so going over to Sherelle Lamar's case, these things happen over Christmas. People have a lot of time, I guess, on their hands. They have a little break to do things that they intend to do. And all of a sudden, I just start my social media is going on. I had a personal website I had to take down at the time, just inundated. Everywhere they could get me online, the college, the governing board, the administration, any dean they could find at our sister colleges, at Contra Costa College in Richmond, and Los Medanos College. People were just they were very well organized. It was a very well organized machine, and this is where we have to give them credit for having that type of organization on the ground and on social media to really pressure folks to disrupt what we're engaged in. And one of their goals was to have me fired. I came in as a tenure track. I still don't have tenure. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. But at least I had some of the protections that a tenure track faculty member does have, not like our folks who on the second tiered system of the adjunctification of the university, which is a separate structural issue I also want to mention. They don't have those protections. And this is something where people in our, which is becoming an industry, don't have those protections, right? I hate to use a neoliberal logic, but that's the way the university functions. So when we're speaking about, I had some protections there, but yet not the protection of tenure. But what Professor Masick just pointed out, even tenure will not provide you cover, in the case of Sherelle Lamar, to these attacks that are concerted, that are life-threatening. So overall, that period of Christmas, we had an incoming president who was about to come in. Again, this was her Christmas present, coming into the college to deal with this issue, like what's happening. And we know, in general, the university responses from the administration have been to quiet things down, and hopefully it goes away. That wasn't the case here. It continued the harassment by all the aforementioned media outlets, from the College Fix, Campus Reform, the Red Elephant, to Fox News, to Breitbart. Breitbart picks this up first, and really, it takes off. It takes off. I'm even receiving threats from Fox to comment on, and I knew better not to comment with Fox. But so they were issuing these threats, like, if you don't comment by this time, we're going national with your story. And I'm like, oh no, get ready for the hate to come. Right? So this is kind of where teaching and engage in the research that is very subjective, very personal to what I do, right, is to challenge and eliminate racism or white supremacy, how you see it. And as when we, who are very few in the academy overall across the country, attempt to place and center our subjectivities, and the university claims that that's why they're hiring us, to add to the diversity of voices, but then when we do that, we are confronted with these forms of violence, right? Which is central to my research, by the way, when I developed these theories of racial violence and how that functions. It's not only on the ground and these realities of physical force that maybe folks engage in every day, whether at the borders, on our city streets, or transnationally. But there are other forms of violence that kill people slowly. And I won't jump into that right now. So these type of personal attacks, they got into into my entire personal life. Threatened my family down there. I'm from Southern California. They're receiving threats. I'm receiving threats. I have a daughter. They had pictures of us. They got into everything, right? Posted up in my home address, urging people to come to my house. So this was a very, okay, this is not going to lead me to as many colleagues who are like, hey, first, you should be careful. You don't have tenure. But secondly, your physical safety. But, yes.
So you got doxed?
Yes, in general. There we go, right? Yeah. So I got doxed. And these are some of the details of that doxing where we get, it does become literally home to my family. And I'm putting myself out there, and I know the consequences of what I teach in class are controversial in the sense that they challenge the common sense in society, but not controversial from an academic perspective. Because academically, this is all verifiable, right? Our right to pursue the research and take it, or as Mark says, the engage in the ruthless criticism of everything, of the existing order of power without fearing what we're provoking, who we're awakening. And that's, I think, what grounds us all in these spaces is we are here to engage in that work, to produce these critical thinkers, and to transform society as a whole. But, so, the process, I did reach out to the AAUP. I had comrades on campus who did come to my defense. The administration, not so much, as I mentioned, not so much. This is still 2 years later, 2 years almost to the date later, we are still engaged. It is one of the positive outcomes that just this past week, our union, as our collective bargaining agreement, now instituted that principle of academic freedom, put in its legal language into our contract now. And that was just agreed to and disseminated a couple days ago.
And how long did we fight for that?
Well, 2 years. Right? So 2 years to get a clause on academic freedom into this, and it took multiple. It's been an ongoing, contentious battle. And I think, yes, at Diablo Valley College, so our United Faculty, which also covers the entire Contra Costa Community College District, our sister colleges, Contra Costa in Richmond and Los Medanos. So, and this is something we were fighting for from the inception, something that I made clear to the president, to the entire administration. This is not about me. I'll take the heat, and I know, I anticipated the response. Not because what we're saying is outlandish, but because we know, as studying political power, and all power, and these are some of the calls that I would receive. We're coming to get you. We hold all power. And I was like, you're correct. You do hold all power, from the White House to the street to the organizations that you just mentioned, to the students on college campuses, from college Republicans aligned with them, and the amount of funding, and along with the corporate media that defends them, right? So this is something that I think it's one story of one faculty member at a local college, but as you mentioned, we will be hearing from somebody from the East Coast, but these are hundreds and hundreds of cases now that have been chronicled. But the bigger issue, I think, is not just about those of us who have been specifically targeted, but it's for our colleagues now who begin to self-censor. Right? I think that's the biggest fear. That's something that we held. And I have colleagues on campus who have told me directly, I won't engage that stuff anymore because I don't want this. I mean, and they're good people. They're good educators, but they are also being practical. They don't want to face threats to themselves or their children, which I understand, right? But this is something that if we don't take this up, then the whole mission, the whole principle, the entire mission of academic freedom is something that is just, it remains abstract. It remains abstract, and it remains, it prevents these institutions from actually engaging in societal transformation. Because it just preserves the status quo that is premised upon just, again, it's an industry, cranking out workers, right? Not critical thinkers. And this is something where we're thinking about defending academic freedom And, Stephen Salida's case,
Yeah.
mentioned from Illinois, gave a speech in Cape Town so not too long ago on academic freedom and his personal case, where he is now a scholar, a tenured professor, denied again for speaking out against the atrocities in occupied Palestine. But he's driving a school bus now.
Yeah.
Right? Driving a school bus. But so that's where he's coming from. But again, he was asking us all in that speech to really have the courage, right? To have the courage to continue to fight for not academic freedom as an abstract, not something abstract, but to engage in that contentious political struggle that is necessary. And that's kind of the message that I echo, and I'm sure Chicarella Morrow echoes that same sentiment. So there are those that we can call comrades in academia who are engaged on that political terrain, are willing to take that on, but the majority remain as just colleagues, right? As colleagues. And so how many colleagues do we have to convince to engage in the mission that they signed up for, right? And I think that's the lesson. I'm not here to offer up a story about these are my, pity me. I say join me and build that solidarity and no longer stand on the sidelines and be a colleague, but now be a comrade and willing to take on the powerful, right? Because that's what we're engaged in. It's a struggle for those who hold the apparatus of the media, right? To dissuade people in the common sense like this it's a spectacle. And that's what Breitbart, that's what Fox News hold up, and that's why they point this out, and I think it's rightfully so. There is no threats coming from the students. The threat is from the White House, it is from Congress, it is from Madison Avenue, it is from every other space except these college campuses that we're trying to defend, where we're going to produce these critical thinkers that go out there. So I think that's where the future does lay that out for us, right? And for those who wish to defend academic freedom have to be engaged in it a lot more. And I liken it when I talk to my students in American government, the Bill of Rights. Our students think that they have these protections forever and for all time that were enshrined in, at the founding. And I say, no, they are. Some are actually gone. You might not know. Right? Some are being violated as you speak. Look at the Fourth Amendment. And the same with academic freedom. We have colleagues who think, oh, we have the right to do this. Well, extend your research and see what the boundaries are. Right? Push those boundaries of thinking, of new knowledge productions, of integrating knowledges from an indigenous perspective, from a genocidal perspective of U.S. history, from my own personal history as being the son of Mexican migrants. And when I integrate that is a threat, because I shouldn't be doing that in political science, right? And I say, when I'm taking it as a victim, or not a victim, but illustrating how the structures are formed and produce violent outcomes for people from the communities that I come from, we're not supposed to talk about that in political science. So I'm also policed with the boundaries of my own discipline, right? And I think we all face those constraints if we take on these traditional disciplines that emerge from that, the German or the modern research university system, right? Which we all inhabit today, and we don't go back and reconsider those assumptions. And how do we integrate new epistemologies? Well, just integrating those forms of knowledge into spaces where they don't belong, that is a threat to this system of white supremacy. So anytime that we're willing to think about how to do it, we must also know and think about, anticipate the responses that we're going to have. And they could be violent. Right? Violent, meaning either violent where somebody loses their livelihood, their paycheck to pay, the mortgage, their rent, basic forms of subsistence. So I'm going to pause there. There's a lot. I could go on forever, right? But I want to hear and engage in a discussion and on this principle and on the form of thinking of self-censorship. How we do that and how to prevent that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I want to thank Dr. Alpert Ponte for sharing his story and also those very powerful statements. And I'm proud to call Alpert a colleague and a comrade, brother. And I know that there were a handful of folks on our campus that rallied to your defense. And it was both for your defense, but it was definitely also, as you aptly put it, in the defense of the abstract concept. For me, as someone that regularly pushes boundaries for a living, as a white male, I have been seemingly less targeted, even though I've talked about extraordinarily controversial issues. I just wanted to point out that the things that you teach and the things that you talk about in public were exactly a matter of factual research, right? Again, you made that point. I want to double down on it, simply because when a handful of us went to support you and the abstract concept, it was pretty amazing that even among people that appeared to be liberal administrators, that it was really hard for them to grip the abstract concept when it stared them straight in the face as a colleague and a person. And I think Albert's a hell of a guy and has a great community for supporting him for what he's faced literally and personally. I want to thank you for being here to share that with us. So we also need to hear from all of you. So why don't you all feel free to offer up your comments and any questions you might have. And I know these two have a lot more that they could share. And again, I know you all have stuff to share. So I'd like to open it up here. We've got another 20 minutes.
I was thinking a lot about the bogus.
Actually, you are still.
Me?
Yeah.
Michelle?
Never introduced you.
To speak to folks. Michelle Stewart from University of Quebec in Montreal. Lately. And very old friend of Steve's. But I've been thinking a lot about the bogus campus free speech crusaders, anything but. And I mean, it's basically, I had to cut this slide, but if you look at who the climate denial, conservative influence machine are, it's the same people who fund FIRE, the free speech people. And by their own statistics, there's no crisis too. That's what's hilarious. Like this research they found they can't actually really produce the crisis. But it's basically a battle for hegemony, and my question is for us is how do we enter into that field when they have, actually very loud microphones in the media and the White House. So they've done a really good job, and it was strategic between think tanks and training representatives and establishing their own media outlets that then take up a lot of mainstream space to define these terms. So it's a battle on for the definition of the fundamental terms of democracy. And as sometimes in these days I feel a bit disempowered by how we can have as much airtime to convince people like actually this is what free speech looks like. And it includes recognition of dignity. And so my talk is called for your amplified speech, by the way. So.
Either of you want
to comment?
Go ahead, and I'll.
No, yeah, so there is, it is a tough battle, right, to move against that narrative. But I think doing the work, and part of the work what we're doing, I'm also co-directing our new social justice studies program. And one of the models that we've established in it is a community engagement model. So we built a community advisory board with a lot of the organizations that have been doing good work on the ground, where we can link up our students, link up our program, get feedback on what type of pedagogies that they would, try to integrate into the program. And I think about establishing that local network to disseminate, what's happening on the ground, and that's that local model, right? I think that's a local model that can spawn local models everywhere, and they are there, right? They are there, and I think that's what kind of is pushing back against this narrative. The media, the independent forms of media that are out there, Project Censor, everyone who's out there doing that kind of work is really moving to challenge that. And I think in the facilitating the knowledge dissemination, I always call myself a facilitator in the classroom. It's how are we empowering others to carry that wherever they are and transform or beat back the common sense. I'm using the common sense and the Gramscian notion, right, of how do we push that back and really change that in order to overthrow that.
I guess I would just echo what Albert said. I think that's really well put. I think it's really important, especially for those of us on the left inside the academy, not to remain inside the ivory tower. Because if we do, we're just very easy targets, right? And then when we're attacked, we're completely isolated. I have seen it happen a number of times, right, in the Chicago area. You mentioned Stephen Salida's case. The Illinois AAUP it actually launched its own investigation of that case before the national AAUP acted. We wrote a letter, we spoke out, and we also leveraged people in the peace and justice community, got them involved. And we've done that on other occasions. So, how successful we've been is, Stephen Salida does not have a job right now. We were not, even though the University of Illinois acknowledged their wrongdoing in unhiring him, which is how they refused to call it firing, unhiring him, they nevertheless paid him a settlement of close to $1 million. And have now changed their policies, so what happened to him can never happen again, and every administrator who was involved in that decision, from the chancellor to some members of the board who were involved, none of them are at the University of Illinois anymore. So they were chastened by the whole incident, and it's because it wasn't just the AAUP or academics who were expressing solidarity with Stephen Salida. It was people from Jewish Voices for Peace and various Palestinian justice organizations, BDS groups. A lot of different people who were interested in justice for Palestine were actively involved in supporting him, as well as sort of the broader left. The same sort of forces were mobilized around the Norman Finkelstein case, and I was in Chicago when that happened, when he was denied tenure at the university, at DePaul University, after Alan Dershowitz sent to the committee a thick dossier arguing that he should be denied tenure, which is completely unprecedented, right? And he was ultimately denied tenure, despite being a very incredibly accomplished scholar and public intellectual. So you had a similar group of people who mobilized around that. I think it made some difference. I don't want to say it made no difference. It's an ongoing struggle, as Gramsci, I'm sure, would acknowledge, right? Hegemony is not won once and for all. It's sort of a constant struggle. But building those kind of links between the left and the left in the academy and community organizations, social justice groups, and social movements is like absolutely key. Otherwise, we won't be able to accomplish anything. The AUP will be able to send a letter, and it will be filed in the shredder, and nothing will happen.
Anybody else? Another comment or question? Yeah, hold on here. I'm going to play my Phil Donahue role, right? Hopefully I won't lose my show from MSNBC.
I'm Chris Robay. It's funny, you both answered the question I was going to have that you did off of Michelle, like how can you do this organized externally? Oh, you don't have to do the camera on me. So I just wanted to share something that spoke true to me with what Albert was saying, and sort of extending a question to you too. Just the notion of the abstract notion of academic freedom versus concrete. I was union president for a while at my university, and they were trying to fire an instructor for a classroom assignment that he did. Some student reported, and the right wing kind of got wind of it, and the instructor was placed on kind of a gag order. He couldn't speak, which of course the university wasn't calling it that. They were just, for his protection. I'm like, so like this 22-year-old kid gets like the framing of the thing. Anyway, I remember a time when I was sitting with my provost when I was university president, and it's over lunch, And she's like, of course we believe in academic freedom, Chris, right? Like, this is absolutely important for us. But she's like, could you just in this instance give us a one-off? And I'm like, a one-off? She's like, let's just fire him, this time, and next time around, we'll be all right. And I'm like, well, that's how you lose academic freedom, actually. The one-off is actually, so it's just interesting how they do leverage, right, the notion of the principle in contrast to the actual practice. So, but the good side of the whole thing that happened, we had an instructor, we had no rights really, he could have been fired, our union contract was hopeless in this way, right? It was a one-year thing, you didn't have to be rehired. So our strategy was like, we had to make this about the principle, not about you, right? This fit everybody. And what resulted was it really strengthened the faculty in a pretty foundational way, in that I heard that our faculty senate apparently had an academic and due process committee that was defunct. So I pretended it still existed. I said I want to bring this to the academic due process committee. Prior to me actually informing faculty, knowing that didn't exist, I want you to serve on this thing, all union members, right? So when they bring up this thing, let you nominate yourself for it. So we did, and they were like, oh, cool, we'll get on it, right? We made them save face, and like they suddenly constituted an academic, due process committee. It was all the left-wingers and sort of, whatever the people who are supportive. And we kind of wedged the university. We were also bringing the news media in. The positive side for this, at least from my recollection when I dealt with the news media, they understand free speech, right? In some ways you can leverage them to some degree on that, at least the paper press, right? That itself. So we were wedging them every which way. We had the news media show up every faculty senate, and I would ask them the question every senate, are you going to fire this guy or not? And they kind of just bumbled, boo, boo. But we also had this due process committee that was doing a report on this, but they were cognizant of that it couldn't be delayed like a year, right? They had to be quick and efficient in terms of doing this. So that was the key thing of who we got on that committee to get it done in 2 months. Because of course the administration, again, in principle is like, we believe in this committee, take a year, so when he's fired, over the summer, you can get back to us with your thing. So it was like of urgency for those 2 months. But long story short, like even people politically who weren't really down with the union were down with the principles, and I felt like we created a kind of, again, Gramsci I'm down with, right? A Gramscian block there that we started emerging out of that kind of catastrophe in a way. So I'm wondering, how your union responded to it, or if you have other examples of internal organizing that might have resulted from this that, might benefit us all.
Can you talk about the assignment?
It was Stomp on Jesus. It was like to write a name,
Right.
so.
Stomp on Jesus.
Yeah, so to write the name down, it's a semiotic. Right? So,
No, so thinking about, the structure, and one of the things, as Mickey pointed out, we had, I had support from a handful of colleagues. Our first step was go to the academic senate. And there's an awareness, again, by all faculty on the abstraction of it. But it's happening in the room, and some of them are like, whoa, don't know how to deal with the reality that it is in the room. And maybe let's talk about it, all right? And that was kind of the initial process, like we need to have conversations about it. But let's go on to the next item on the agenda. And luckily we had colleagues who did stand up and said, this is almost life or death. Not only personally are you receiving death threats, but this is about us all. So that kind of, in the room, in the space of that faculty structure, it was kind of made evident on where people's understanding of the abstraction of academic freedom, something that is envisioned, that's always there, but when it's actually practiced, you might be the one-off, right, so to speak. But what it did lead to, as we kept pressing, and those who were committed to that were there's a committee established to, okay, let's develop the language. Let's develop a resolution. And so the academic senate takes that on, the union takes on another function, and through that we send a team, a pretty large team, to a academic freedom conference here in California, set up over at Berkeley, and out of that, we ended just this past week with that TA, that agreement. So positive, but it has been a very long, arduous process. Even reworking some of the language that you saw, we worked on. So there's those victories, but again, I just want to, this is going to be always a contentious issue. And I think we, as faculty, always can't get comfortable, right? We can't stay in that ivory tower. We have to keep our work, with the research, the pedagogy, our students linked up to those organizations that are already structured on the ground. And that's paramount, right, in this battle.
I'll just say your strategy of stacking the committee with progressives was a smart one. So my institution, we have just created an ad hoc committee, ad hoc handbook committee to completely kind of review the handbook. And I'm chair, so we're gonna, even though it's going to be 2 years of just living hell, going through our mess of a handbook, one of the things that will result from it is it will look a lot like the AAUP Red Book when we're done. And we have managed to get a number of good people on there. The camera's rolling, so I won't mention how we're going to deal with. There's a couple of people there who are sort of clearly representing the administration, but you know, I have my own strategies for dealing with that. So in any case, you know, I think that's really important, and that's something our AAUP chapter at North Central has sort of been pressing for. We wanted to have this committee, and then we wanted to be sure that we were, you know, that as many of us who are active members of the chapter were on that committee to draft that language. We have protections for academic freedom in our current handbook, but we think that there are some problems with certain aspects of it that do, in fact, like grievance procedure language has an effect on academic freedom. Because what academic freedom really means is, you know, they can't dismiss you without cause, right? They have to, you know, they have to provide you with a hearing, and that hearing has to follow due process, right, before you can be dismissed, which is the ultimate protection for academic freedom. And we have some problems with that in our handbook, which we hope to fix.
And in closing, since we're about out of time, I wanted to reiterate something that came up here with both of our speakers, and including Albert, that could easily have gone into a long tangent about the adjunctification of the academy. And I know we've heard ivory tower up here numerous times. People know what that means, but you know, we teach at brick and mortar places, right? They're not, DVC is not ivory tower, Cal State East Bay is not ivory tower. Right, a lot of our students are working class, immigrants, and you know, a lot of these people are struggling on a number of levels, and you know, they're in solidarity with us when we're in solidarity with them. And I would be remiss if I didn't point out, and I know you heard Albert say that he has yet to get tenure, though I'm sure that's happening very soon, certainly because of the great quality of education that he brings and what he brings to our campus community and beyond. But it's really important that we not only honor the abstract principles, but we really need to also, those of us that do have tenure, those of us that are in quasi-administrative positions or literally in administrative positions, we really need to go to bat for the people that are self-censoring because they're worried about their jobs and they see loudly and clearly, if it can happen to this person, it can happen to me. And they don't always talk about this. Adjuncts don't always talk about it. I'm chair of my department, co-chair of my department, and I have people in my faculty, on our faculty. I'll find out something that happens months later, and they won't even. And they'll be like, "Well, we didn't know if we could talk to you about it." You know, and I'm like, "I'm the director of Project Censored." You know, but they internalize it, and I think the reason they internalize it is because of the climate that you were talking about. The climate of fear, the very personal accounts that get paraded across right-wing media, and people see what happens, right? And they say, that can't happen to me. And that's a real blow to academic freedom and free expression, and it's a real blow to the significance that higher education is for a purportedly free culture and society. So not that we need to remind ourselves necessarily here, but maybe when we are on our campuses, maybe we reach out to some of those other people who maybe we wouldn't want to have on that certain committee because they just don't see it as a problem because it doesn't directly affect them. And in many cases, that's because of their privilege. And in many cases, it's because they often regurgitate what's in the legitimate realm of controversy, right? And they don't delve outside where the facts go. They don't dig deeply where the real challenges are. And I think that that's part of our job, and part of the honor and privilege of being in higher education is to push those buttons and to shine light in the dark places. So again, it's an honor that I get to do that, and it's an honor that I get to work with people and know people like Steve and Alpert, and thank all of you for being here today and for all that you do. We're going to be speaking, Steve and I, and Nolan Higdon and Robin Anderson. Right now, we've got the round table and lunch, 12:30 to 1:45. I have just been informed that that is UU, that's this building, 2002 AB. No, it's the other building. It's the building right next to us. It's the new UU. Yeah, the new UU, and 2002 AB. We're going to be there to talk about our new book that I did with Nolan Higdon. It's called United States of Distraction. It's a roundtable discussion about Trump, the media, and America's truth emergency with Project Censored. So hope to see you over there in 15 minutes for lunch. And again, thanks for being here.
Thank you.